time.
Senator Flacco.
Mr. President, House Bill 1087 is sometimes called the Civics Education Bill. I know many of you have taken the test, and I know scores of people from across the state have taken the same test. And I know that this bill has produced a lot of enthusiasm and energy behind civics by teachers and parents, as well as general citizens across the state. It is the same test given to new Americans who apply for citizenship in this great country. Mr. President, because at its core it references specific people and events and may require a reading from quotes, I would ask for leave of the Senate to cite a few names or other specifics not normally allowed under the rules of the chamber.
Without objection.
Civics is the cornerstone in for the heart and mind and soul of our country. Civics knowledge and skills help adults form their political attitudes on the basis of facts and issues rather than personalities and attacks. House Bill 1087 requires essentially all public and private school students to pass a civics test prior to their graduation. The test is one offered for individuals who seek U.S. citizenship. Under this bill, the test will be offered to students beginning with their 7th grade, and as soon as they pass, they have met that qualification. The requirement will begin the 2nd year of the biennium, and during that first transitional year, students must get at least a 70% of the questions right in order to be eligible for graduation. That percentage is raised to 70%, up from 60% the first year to 70% in 2017-2018 school year. Now, if you look at the bill and slide down near the bottom of page 1 in section 3, beginning on line 19, it also shows that those students who are required to successfully complete it include public and private school students, students enrolled in the Center for Distance Education, those who obtain their GED, and it also requires those that are homeschooled but seeking their diploma from a public school to successfully take the test. It is also important to note that it does have an exemption for special education students unless it is part of their individualized program plan or IEP. No one can charge for the test, and the test can be offered in whole or in part, and they can take it as many times as they wish in order to complete it. An example of the 3 main topic areas that they may want to break up as follows: 1, government; 2, American history; and 3, integrated civics. We know that the test alone will not guarantee that students become active, engaged citizens who vote, attend community meetings, etc. But numerous studies have shown that the knowledge gained through courses in civics and history increase students' confidence and the propensity towards active civic participation in areas such as volunteering, communicating, and elected officials, signing petitions, attending community meetings, and voting. During testimony, our North Dakota Superintendent of Public Instruction said, "When you assess something, it demonstrates the belief that this knowledge is especially important. This test is not a be-all or end-all to civics education in our schools. It is an opportunity to provide rich instruction and the context to subjects that are mentioned in the test. It opens the door to form partnerships with the community, with veterans groups, and other civic organizations," end of quote. Mr. President, I'm certain that I've attended more naturalization ceremonies than anyone in this room, and I can attest that they are magnificent and joyous occasions that are dripping with patriotism. I personally can see a time when families will have family celebrations around the facts that their sons or daughters have passed this test. It is truly a meaningful accomplishment, much like those citizens who become new Americans. Items such as the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, are national treasures, but I consider them also to be family heirlooms that are a rich part of our past and help define who we are today, both as individuals but also as a country. In North Dakota, civics is not just something you learn, but it's something that we expect to live. Part of our secret sauce, as it were, in North Dakota is that we recognize the value and understanding of civics, and that we understand that this is a precursor to a better community and a state. In North Dakota, learned traits such as civic dispositions, public spiritedness, civility, and respect for rule of the law are all important. Civics is important because it helps people to understand how government works and provides people with the knowledge about how to influence government as a citizen in order to move agendas forward. The history behind documents and other things that define us also gives us a longer lens so that we don't just think in terms of today, but in terms of the next 100 years and beyond. If you think in terms of world history, America's greatest contribution to the world is our form of government. These documents and laws help us define and understand the units into which the country is divided, like the states, districts, municipalities, and village units. It describes the powers of the units and their interrelationships. It gives an insight into the works of the Constitution and how the workings of these three branches of government, namely the legislative, executive branch, and the judicial branch, function. Civics is the window that shows us our American exceptionalism. Civics education helps citizens understand the valuable role they play in society. It helps people understand their rights, but it also helps them understand their duties. North Dakotans also realize that civic education is essentially to sustain our constitutional democracy. The habits of the mind, as well as the habits of the heart and the dispositions that inform the democratic ethos, are not inherited from our parents. As, and I'll do my best, Alexis de Tocqueville, a Frenchman who visited America to learn about government, said, he pointed out, each new generation is a new people that must acquire the knowledge, learn the skills, and develop the dispositions of traits of private and public character that undergird our constitutional democracy. Those dispositions must be fostered and nurtured by word and study and by the power of example. Democracy is not a machine that would go on by itself. It must be consciously reproduced one generation after another. Mr. President, people matter and events matter in the shaping of lives those that come before us. Take this date in world history. Where would the world be without Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, the composer who was born on this day in 1756? 135 years ago, Mr. Edison patented the electric incandescent lamp. In 1926, the first demonstration of a pictorial transmission, then called the television, was made. And two really important things for our world and our country. 70 years ago today, the troops liberated the Nazi concentration camp of Auschwitz and Birkenau in Poland. And in 1973, the Vietnam Peace Accords were signed in Paris, officially ending the Vietnam War. While these may not always be civics tests, it's a brief reminder that if you take any one of these people or events away, literally billions of lives will be changed. Mr. President, I would note that during testimony both in the House and the Senate side, no one testified in opposition to this bill. Mr. President, this is a bipartisan piece of legislation, and those competing interests do not always agree. But they were united in the belief that this is important for all Americans to know about the first principles of our constitutional government. Mr. President, your Senate Education Committee submits a due pass recommendation with a bipartisan, unanimous vote, and we ask you to follow.
Is there any further discussion? Any further discussion? Senator Triplet.
Mr. President, may we be on the sixth order for purposes of an amendment?
Does every senator have a copy of the amendment?
No, I had requested that it be passed out at the beginning of the discussion, and I see the pages are only just beginning to distribute it, so perhaps I should stand at ease until they finish.
Does everyone have a copy of the amendment? Senator Triplet, do you wish to move the amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, excuse me.
Could you read the numbers so that everybody can confirm that they have the right one?
I'm getting there as soon as I have my glasses on, Mr. President. I hereby move Amendment 15.0351.04002.
We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Senator Triplet, explain your amendment.
Thank you. Mr. President, I will say, first of all, that I agree with almost everything that the carrier of the bill said regarding the importance of civics and understanding of civics to the education of our young people and to the lifelong learning of all of our citizens. My objection to the bill as written has nothing to do with the notion of having such content taught in our schools. My objection is to the process and the policy, specifically the repeat testing. I think you will see from the amendment that what it does is it simply removes the testing component and suggests that the information, the concepts embodied in the civics test as defined in the original bill need to be presented to students. And I would note in thinking about this that at some point in the fairly distant past, our educational requirements for students had a lot of individual detail to what needed to be put into the curriculum. And then at some point, prior to my being a member of this body, it developed that the educational curriculum was defined more by generic topics, as you all know, a certain number of units of math and English and other allowable kinds of things, this or that, so that local school districts all understood the range of topics that needed to be taught and the number of units that were preferred. And that has changed through time to some degree. And our educational curriculum is pretty clean right now. But there are a few other topics that have been inserted, and I'm going to share those with you. One of them is concepts of personal finance, which was put in a couple of sessions ago. It doesn't require specific testing, but it does say that beginning in July of 2010, each school district shall ensure that its curriculum for either economics or problems of democracy includes the exposure of students to concepts of personal finance, and then it has some detail associated with that. And similarly, as you can see from the amendment itself, where I have included the new language, existing language requires that students need to have read our foundational documents. The student school district shall ensure that the student has read the Declaration of Independence, the United States Constitution, including the Bill of Rights. And so, there is certainly some backsliding, I would say, toward adding specific things back into the law. But as a general matter, we've kept it pretty clean. And I think it's important that we, as policymakers, think about how our century code looks and is interpreted. And, it occurred to me that if even 10% of us came to this session each year with our favorite topics, given the turnover over time, it would only be 10 or 20 years before the century code would be completely clogged back up again with individual things. And I have my own personal favorites. I would want to think that all students who graduate from high school should know how to do square roots by hand. That's important to me. It may not be important to anybody else, but personally I was appalled when I found out 10 or 15 years ago that my sons were going through the public school in my town and had been taught how to do square roots on a calculator, and they thought I was some kind of a magic wizard that I knew how to do them by hand. So, if I wanted to put my own personal stamp on our curriculum, I would bring that in. There's a woman who is a constituent of mine who has publicly stated a number of times that she really thinks that every educated person in North Dakota ought to have a couple of years of Latin under their belt. We don't require that, but what if a legislator said they wanted that? I think you can see the point here, that if we start back down this path, that we make life really difficult for our local administrators. And so, I want you to, along with the carrier and with me, I think we can all acknowledge that the sponsors and the promoters of this bill are well-meaning people who care deeply about education. But from a policy perspective, this notion of adding detail and testing back into the century code is bad policy. And I think we have to ask what problem it is that we think we're solving. And as far as I've been able to tell, the problem that we're solving is that people saw on television that students in some other states couldn't answer these basic questions. And we don't have any control over what students in other states learn or what they know or don't know. And I would be very, very surprised if all of the students, excepting those who may have developmental disabilities in our state, couldn't get well over 70% of this test without ever having looked at it or studied for it. I've read it. I'm sure most of you have too. The questions are simplistic. They may, as the carrier says, be a door to deeper conversations about concepts, but the test itself is very, very simplistic. And it may be difficult for immigrants coming in who come from a parliamentary system or from a country that has been in anarchy for 20 years and knows nothing about government. May even be confusing for someone coming from merry old England who doesn't have a federal system the way we do, with different levels of the state and federal governments having different powers. So for immigrants, for them to focus on these concepts at a basic level makes sense. I would hope that our students know all of this stuff by osmosis by the time they're 12 years old, native-born citizens. So I think you need to ask, what problem are we trying to solve and at what price? And the cost, is damage to the flow of the curriculum and the additional testing and the additional burden on our schools and our school offices and our State Department of Public Instruction. And so I would respectfully invite you, to as many of you as reasonable, to join me in passing this amendment and then pass the bill. Thank you.
Senator Flacco.
Well, Mr. President, I would hope, obviously, that we would reject the amendments that have been offered up. And I would also note that the first reading of this bill took place 21 days ago, and during that time, these were not at any time offered as a solution or an improvement. So in 21 days, that's essentially a lifetime in the legislature. But I don't think these amendments make it any better. When you think of what we do when we first take office, technically before we take office, we have to do the oath of office. And that is based upon many of the tenets that are provided for in this bill. The amendments as proposed by the senator from District 18 really take the heart and soul out of the bill, and they take away the accountability, I believe, from that. The bill, as it was brought to you unanimously by our Senate Education Committee, really provides a great deal of flexibility. And in no way is the test punitive. It's fair, it's meaningful, and it really is a launching point for greater involvement, as was cited in testimony by a 42-year veteran of the military. The public support by citizens, including veteran groups, has been overwhelming, and the 57,000 North Dakota veterans have taken the ultimate test to support much of what we are talking about in the civics education and the test. I think this bill, without these amendments, really needs to stay in place because it sends the important message that what we test is what we view as important. This is about country first. And to me, that's why it's personally important to me as I looked at this bill. I would also note that this would tear that portion out as far as the testing goes. And I would also remind the body, Mr. President, that a student may take the test multiple times until which point they pass the test. So certainly that isn't really a overly difficult task. So they test, they don't get it, they relearn, they study, they take the test again, and they can be broken up into blocks. So I would also cite Article 8 of the Constitution, which reads as follows, if I may continue to have leave of the Senate.
Without objection, permission.
On the education section, Article 8, Section 1, a high degree of intelligence, patriotism, integrity, and morality on the part of every voter in a government by the people being necessary in order to ensure the continuance of that government and the prosperity and happiness of the people, end of quote. Just to kind of a couple cleanup things, new Americans who take the test pass with a 91% at a 91% rate. So it seems that we haven't been overly heavy-handed in this. And I just ask that the Senate rejects the amendments that are before us because I think it neuters the bill, and let's send the bill up for vote as it was introduced, as it was supported in both chambers, as it was supported unanimously by bipartisan action in the Education Committee, and reject the Hog House amendments, Mr. President.
Senator Snyder.
Happens to all of us, Mr. President. I would request a verification vote on the amendment.
Verification vote will be taken. Senator Mather.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thought it was fascinating hearing the carrier of the bill refer to our oath of office. And to me, he made a great point that would support the amendment. We take an oath of office. We do not take the civics test. You know, if it is accurate that we really ought to have a full evidence of our patriotism or our knowledge of citizenship, we really wouldn't just take an oath of office. We would take the civics exam. And I don't see the civics exam as part of this bill for legislators, though legislators are in fact patriotic, are in fact knowledgeable about our country, its system of government. And it seems to me that's what this amendment is doing. This amendment, that I would compliment the carrier of the amendment. She basically is saying civics and knowledge of civics is very important. Let's not put the details into the North Dakota Century Code. In the same way, we take the oath of office. We do not, on this first day, all sit down and take an exam. And so I compliment the work on this bill. I hope that we support this amendment and appreciate that we're all concerned about civics and our citizenry developing our good sense of government.
Senator Flacco.
Mr. President, to the point about legislators taking the civics test as a prerequisite for serving in this wonderful chamber, you know, essentially that would, as I would think, and I've talked to a few different folks, that it would essentially violate the North Dakota Constitution, because this issue has been talked about, and again, I would ask you to push the red button and vote nay.
Senator Triplet.
Just briefly, Mr. President, I want to respond to the carrier's suggestion that I should have turned up at the committee hearing with these amendments, and I would happily have done that had I known it was on such a fast track. It did not occur to me to be tracking this bill yet. I learned that it had already been moved over to this side and heard in committee by reading it in the newspaper, and I suppose that's my fault for not paying close enough attention, but this is outside the usual course of business for us. And I just want to make that clear that I think we need to be careful about what things we fast track, and that they ought to be topics of serious import, in which there is discussion, and in which the word is passed freely to both sides of the aisle. I certainly would have attended the hearing in the Education Committee had I been aware of it, and I would just formally like to register my objection to the fast tracking of this bill. I think it also failed to allow anyone who might have heard about it for the first time after it passed the House and might have thought about filing objections, and then to read about it a couple days later that it had already also gone through the committee on this side. I think it was inappropriate, and then that process ought to be used more sparingly.
Is there any further discussion? For the benefit of new members to the chamber, I would mention that on a verification vote, you will not see your name changed on the board, so you will not see what the vote is. Hearing no further discussion, the secretary will open the key and every senator will register their vote. Every senator has voted. Does any senator wish to change their vote? Tally reveals that the amendment has failed. Senate will return to 14th order and continue discussion on Senate Bill or House Bill 1087. Is there any further discussion? Senator Flacco.
Well, Mr. President, not to belabor the bill, but I would note that last session on day 8, which is half of the current day 16, we had House Bill 1186 as it relates to legislative bill tracking systems. So we have had times where maybe in some people's minds we fast-tracked them. But you know, this bill does have an advantage in many respects, including the fact that it does not have a fiscal note, and that certainly saves a couple steps in the process. And the other thing I want to put it in context, because we are talking about civics today, so why not? When you think of back in June 28, 1776, the first draft of the Declaration of Independence was introduced in Congress for the first time. Just 6 days later, in the evening of July 4th, the full body voted in support of the Declaration of Independence. Mr. President, there's been some talk about Arizona being the first state to pass similar legislation, but I would note that while it may be a nice honor for them, I'm much more focused, and I believe I would concur with our Senate Education Committee, that we're more focused on having being in the future the #1 state in terms of the percentage of students that pass this the first time. I would also note that our standards are higher than what is being proposed by the state of Arizona. And with that, Mr. President, I think the bill has been stalled too long, probably on the floor today, and that's largely my doing. I presented quite a bit, but I think this is an important piece of legislation that requires, and hopefully we get a strong support on the bill and the committee's recommendation, which was unanimous. And just because someone sent me this earlier, I better note too that on the last session, the surge bill was heard first on January 22nd, and this session it was heard on January 16th, and I think we'll be hearing that one soon. So there'll be other bills, both in the Education Committee and other committees, that will be briskly moving forward, and so stay tuned as we move forward with the variety of bills. And certainly I can't control bills such as that or other bills. We can only, on the Education Committee, so-called chop the wood in front of us. We have a number of bills that we've been acting on. We've been trying to act briskly on all of them. Please vote yes.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. President, I would just like to point out that before actually I came to this session, I received about 20 letters from a civics class in my county addressing this bill. Some of them were in favor and some were against, but let's point out that we've had plenty of notice. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, the question is on the final passage of House Bill 1087. Secretary will open the key and each senator will record his or her vote. Have all the senators voted? Does any senator wish to change his or her vote? Secretary will close the key and take the tally. Final tally on House Bill 1087 reveals 43 yeas, 4 nays. The bill is passed, to which the title is agreed. Senate will return to the